Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Unstructured Unlocked. I'm co-host Michelle Gouveia,
And I'm co-host Tom Wilde.
and we are very excited to welcome today's guest, Louis DiModugno. Some of you may remember he is a return guest. He's done a previous episode with us. We're really, really happy to have him back. Louis is joining us today now as the Global Chief Data Officer at Verisk. So welcome, Louis. Thanks for joining us again.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Really excited to have you back. The first time we had you on, we spent a lot of time talking about data governance and data within the four walls of an insurance carrier. So I'm really excited to hear your thoughts today on how that may have evolved or changed now that you're doing data on the other side, right? As more of a partner and a vendor. So before we dive into all that, obviously everyone can tell I'm excited. Can you share a little bit about what your role entails today and kind of what you've been up to since the last time you joined us?
Sure. So, as Michelle said, I had the great opportunity to join Verisk as their global chief data officer. What's interesting is, again, this is a role that's aligned on the IT side of the house. And when we get into it a little bit further, you'll understand why. But the challenges that I've seen actually from the beginnings of joining Verisk is just that. There's ways that we can ensure that we're working very closely with our customers, carriers in particular, to aggregate their data, normalize it, bring it together from an integration standpoint, doing entity resolution, master data management. It's just a suite of effort that goes from really the interaction with our carriers all the way to bringing them back products that they can then utilize within their pricing, underwriting, claims, and extreme events analysis. So the real interesting thing I think that Verisk brings to the table is, again, it's a suite of effort across the entire value stream for the insurance industry and plenty of ideas and products every step of the way.
Talk about this idea of a chief data officer. The definition varies from company to company. I don't think there is one single definition of the scope of that responsibility. What have you found differs from being sort of inside the carrier where you were to now sort of a provider to the carriers? How do you see that mandate changing, and how do you define it?
Well, a lot of it boils down to, where I am now is further downstream of the initial data capture. So primarily in the insurance space, the data capture is happening out at the agency and broker level. And so that information is either being captured with a stubby pencil or hopefully digitized directly into a system. And once the data ends up with us, our challenge then is to look at it from a standpoint of how can we normalize this and resolve it so that we can see policyholders and customers moving through time, what their exposure is to products, what their exposure is to claims, what kinds of products have they signed up for, do they need based on where they are in their life and or where their company, if it's a commercial product, where their company is from a growth standpoint. So it's very interesting to be able to look back in time and kind of turn the wheel and see how things have changed over time and see those trends and how people move from carrier to carrier, product to product, and really have that insight as to how the entire industry is moving.
I think we actually talked about that the last time, Lewis, and we likened it to a game of telephone, right? It's like the more entities that are part of that chain, the more that data runs the risk of being changed or adjusted, or this sounds more nefarious than it is, but manipulated in a way that isn't true to the actual source. So being yet one step further removed from that, when you're talking about carriers contributing their data, right? So Verisk gets data in two ways, right? You've got contributions from the insurance carriers, and then you've got data that you're aggregating and putting together to then offer out. How do you think about the governance and the compliance as it relates to getting data from those two sources, and how should carriers be thinking about that when they're providing data back to someone like Verisk?
Well, our effort is always making sure that we've got the highest quality data. That's really kind of the ground zero effort that we're focused on. And so as we get data in from companies, what we see is, comparatively to from where they were the last time they contributed data. So we can see the delta change in the information that's coming in. And then we also want to, as I said earlier, pair it up to understand how the policyholders are moving through the environment, through the insurance industry environment or ecosystem, to that matter, as they move from product to product or carrier to carrier, for that matter. There's always an opportunity to increase the quality of the data. And as we look across that, what we are seeing, especially where we are right now in the AI and the generative AI space, that data being as clean and as of high quality as possible, it increases the confidence in the output of those models. And so as we are moving into this space of trying to model more as to try to create products and interactions with our customers and our policyholders more so that they understand more about what their coverages are, how their claims impact, all that information comes to bear in a centralized database that we're continually trying to improve the quality on. So to your earlier point, Michelle, when a carrier is creating their data, right? So whether it's at an agent or a broker level, the emphasis on trying to get that data right from the start is so important. And so I know that, carriers themselves have their own initiatives around creating gold type data within their own policy admin systems. And so what we are hopeful is that as information is being fed to us, it's already gone through some level of cleaning and scrubbing with those carriers. And then once we get it, then we have an opportunity to look at it and again, ensure that it complies with what we've seen previously from that carrier, or that the changes are in line with what we would expect.
Do you think, is there a future where, I think standards get bounced around so often, especially in commercial and specialty, but I sort of liken it to a Tower of Babel. It doesn't seem that we'll get to a point where this sort of the heterogeneity of all the different sources of data, whether it's coming from the insureds themselves, coming from the brokers, going into the carriers, coming out of the carriers, there's just dozens and dozens of points of unstructured data and also just data variances. What do you think about the future of this? Is that the reality? And so, sort of solutions that help make sense of that data continue to be valuable, or is there a future where there's less of this heterogeneity?
Well, one of the good things, we have a number of data feeds and as a data aggregator, and so that's been a very interesting aspect of what we have at Verisk. And again, it's because of the consistency of the partnerships that we have with our carrier customers. What was interesting is, a role that I had with a previous company, they were in the reinsurance space, and the data that they would get was essentially whatever data the carrier was deciding to send them. And so the formats were sometimes unstructured or didn't have really good boundaries. The quality of the data wasn't the best that it could be. It was, and in some cases, I've even seen data get submitted through paper with somebody essentially, handwriting some information on it. The challenge there, is that with Verisk and our role in the industry, our standards are pretty recognized. And we work with a lot of the admin system providers because those admin system providers are predominantly where the data is coming from, right? For each of those organizations. And so as that data is coming from there,
yeah,
go ahead.
This is Guidewire, EIS, those kind of folks, Duck Creek. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. And so, the partnerships that we have with them and the working relationships that we have with them, again, it's very helpful for us to be, either advising or having a partnership so that the data that's coming out of those environments, whether it's from, an embedded warehouse or some other type of data environment that's compiling the data before it's being sent to us. Again, because of the standards of those policy admin systems, it helps also to feed us a level of consistency.
Yep.
Louis, how do you within Verisk specifically, because there may be similarities, but I imagine there's differences. How do you think about data governance and compliance as it relates to managing essentially all of this data that's coming in from various sources? And then how do you kind of message or position the strength of that compliance as part of how you're selling the Verisk suite of solutions?
Yeah, so that's a really great question, and it's really kind of a third rail topic, I think, Michelle, for a lot of carriers. In that, data governance is kind of one of those areas where a lot of organizations do the minimum in order to comply with the regulatory environment or how they're managing their data in house. We've taken kind of a different approach in that we put this in the forefront of what the chief data officer really is responsible, and that's the data governance. And we've gone beyond kind of the standard DAMA framework that's been out there for years and years and years that kind of tell you, hey, these are the areas of data governance, and maybe there's some KPIs associated with them. I've taken it kind of to the next level of an area that I'm talking about around data observability. And this idea of data observability is not just data quality, but it's also across, what do my data flows look like? What data hardware am I using, right? So what my partnership with the CTOs, how is the data being used and the governance around that usage? And for us, that's probably one of the most important pieces because we have contractual obligations with all of our carriers as they're giving us data. We have contractual obligations as to what we can and can't do with that data. So that usage piece is a huge aspect of what I'm continually inventorying and managing from a standpoint of processes through my data scientists and my underwriters. When they want to use data, they have to come and specifically ask a governance board in order to get access to it. And then we have an environment that we've built specifically to have controls around that data. So I know exactly who's accessing it. I know what they're accessing it for. I know how often they're accessing it. All that information is really well controlled within our environment. And then, the underlying pieces here is that there's costs associated with all this, right? And so one of the things from the governance standpoint as well is, what does it cost to do all of this data manipulation, all these data quality initiatives, all this data monitoring? There's definitely resources attributed to it and investment. And so we want to understand also, where's the return coming from these investments and how do we see the data getting better? That really is the underlying piece of this, is that all of these components of data observability all feed back to the data quality of how do I see my data physically getting better in my environment. And then, as I said earlier, the better my data is, the more confidence I have in any model or product that I have as an output from it. So it's a big piece of what we're doing right now. It's definitely a journey, but it is kind of the culmination of all of these data governance opportunities that I've had throughout my career. In some places where companies, paid lip service to it, and other companies, that really made some investment in it. Verisk is really living this. And again, I really am excited about the efforts and the investment that they have in this space.
Has Gen AI changed the mission, or is it a continuation of the original sort of implications AI brought to the table? Because you mentioned this earlier, and I totally agree. It's still a, data quality in, data prediction out, or data interpretation out sort of challenge. Maybe Gen AI allows us to do it even faster and at more scale, but the trickiness of that is it also means we can make mistakes faster and at bigger scale. So has Gen AI changed the mission, or is it really still, quite similar with maybe some additional sort of governance and explainability challenges?
So I think the Gen AI initiatives that we've taken on in-house have really gathered some significant efficiency opportunities for us. And the good thing is that the way we've structured our Gen AI initiatives is that whenever it returns anything, either through a search or a summarization engine, it's coming back with reference components of where did it get it from, right? So our emphasis around using a RAG type LLM architecture is really giving us opportunities. Case in point, we've got all these contracts with all of our carriers. If we have a question around, can we do something or should we do something with a carrier, instead of having a legal professional, spend hours combing through a legal document, we can go ahead and we can run it through an LLM or a Gen AI initiative that comes back with the reference points. And it's actually been quite effective from efficiency standpoint, really giving us the opportunities to do things faster with the insights that maybe we wouldn't have gotten from a human touch.
I hate to keep bringing it back because it sounds like a broken record. I just know, Louis, that you spent a lot of time thinking about this. How do you think about how Gen AI will change the regulatory landscape for data? And I know that you've done a lot of work in this arena as well. So just love your thoughts. And teaser, this may end up being a topic that Tom and I address in a future episode, as well as some of the Department of Insurance guidance and guidelines that are coming out as part of usage of Gen AI and data.
Well, again, I think that because of the statutory efforts around insurance and the insurance regulators, you've got, over 50 environments out there that are continually changing. And so having the capability of bringing that information into an environment where you can ask and receive answers around those areas, looking for changes, looking for essentially deltas of differences between different states. I think that, again, the efficiencies and the insights that are opportunities associated with bringing all that information into a Gen AI environment gives us an aspect that maybe we wouldn't have gotten before. And again, it gives us the opportunity to iterate on it as well because of the speed of function of those Gen AI tools. I think, it's going to create incredible efficiencies in the areas that are only going to benefit the customers. Because again, the less expensive we make the value stream, right? Hopefully that can be relayed into premiums down the road as well. And we all know that, insurance premiums right now are, at the highest level they probably have ever been. Trying to understand the fraud issues and the things that are driving those premiums right now. Again, using Gen AI and some of these AI tools, I think it will give us additional insights so that we can manage those risks or at least understand them better and be able to manage the premiums associated with.
Is modeling risk getting easier or harder? How do you, from your perspective, I think with cat risk and climate impact, how does Verisk think about, how do you think about it? But there's ever more data available than ever before, and there's ever more ability to process that data. So it's hard to know whether is it getting easier or harder, or are we kind of keeping up with it?
I think that with the, I'll say, the advocacy of more data, I think we'll see more segmentation because the volumes will be big enough that we can segment down to smaller levels. It used to be that if you were sampling, your segments would get so small you wouldn't have enough data points there in order to feel comfortable of the output for that level of segmentation. Now the sizes are getting so big that I can segment down to the next level and the next level after that and still have enough data to be confident in my output.
Yeah, I mean, I think Google's got an initiative to try to build a digital twin of the Earth, which is kind of a big crazy idea, but to your point, then you're not sampling, right? You actually have this sort of digital version of Earth that you could model. I think some of the parametric coverage is fascinating with things like earthquake and wind speed, where you simply have IoT measurements, out in the field, and if it exceeds a certain point, it triggers a claim. So yeah, I agree with you. Like less and less sampling, more and more, actual data going into some of these models, complete data sets going into these models.
Yeah. It's a fascinating time. It really is. And, as we get more into the different types of data structures as well, as we move into graph databases and vector databases, where now all of a sudden we've got relationships and connectivity of data across many different fields. It just is going to give us more and more insight into what's happening and how to manage those risks going forward.
So that's a topic I wanted to cover with you a little bit was, and you know this better than I would, so correct me if my base hypothesis is incorrect. But in a lot of cases, at least historically, maybe there's been a minor shift now. Data, even within like a single carrier, was very siloed, right? Underwriting data would sit separate from claims data, and never shall the two meet, even though there's synergies between. And I think that with a lot of the transformation initiatives that happened, moving from legacy systems to maybe something more cloud-based, or just even upgrading a system, broke down some of those walls, but not necessarily all, because some of that data flow and data management structure wasn't there. So it just, like, what are your recommendations or suggestions for companies that are going through that on how to blend their data set so that they do have something more robust that they can pull from and start building analytics off of?
Well, I think what that does hit upon, Michelle, is this whole idea of entity resolution, because the challenge with any bringing together of data sets is how are you going to match them? Right? Because if I try to bring together data sets and I'm all of a sudden into fuzzy algorithms and I'm only getting 70 to 80% match rate, you know what? 5 years ago, I would have taken that and I would have been excited, to have a 70 to 80% match rate. But now I'm looking at opportunities of having match rates, into the 90 percentile. And again, the more matches and the more the higher level of confidence that I have with those matches, the better data that I have, which leads to better models. The challenge, this underwriting versus claims, or the, essentially two separate data environments, it really becomes the crux of almost everything that we do in data, is the level of confidence in bringing these data sets together. Because it does, those confidence levels contribute to the level of accuracy of your model. And so I always use a quick math example for folks. If I've got a data set that I've got 90% confidence in, and I've got another data set that I've got 90% confidence in, and then I've got another data percent that I've got 90% confidence in, I don't add them all up and have 90% confidence. I literally have a multiplicative issue of it's 0.9 times 0.9 times 0.9. And so now all of a sudden I've got I won't say significantly, but I've got a degraded data set now, right? Because each one of those contributed to a less than 100% confidence. So it's something to consider as we're bringing this information together, that we really want to emphasize the highest level of quality from the source, get to that gold level, gold space data. And then as we add things together on top of it, just recognize the fact that you're probably degrading your data set each time you add something else to it, unless it's 100% match.
Yeah, we live this, in the sense of intake accuracy. And I think AI and Gen AI has caused people to have to kind of go to school on what accuracy means, because we get this question all the time, how accurate is it? And I always have to take a bit of a pause and say, well, that's a loaded question. Like, what do you think accuracy means? Because to your point, document level accuracy, field level accuracy, and just as you described, if each field is 98% accurate, well, and there's 40 fields on the document, well, the document accuracy is going to be, quite a bit lower. So when people try to get to things like straight through processing. So I think this idea of accuracy, has become really critical to understand if you're a data professional now, or even frankly, anyone who operates a critical workflow, to be able to communicate internally, what that actually means. The other thing about accuracy that's quite amazing is there's at least a belief that if you had a human process, it was accurate, right? And when you ask people, well, how often do you measure precision and recall, of your human process? The answer is never. Like, nobody I've encountered really does that in a robust way. They haven't brought data science techniques to human processes. And so now trying to map how to compare those two, it's not that easy to do, because there isn't a ground truth of how accurate your current process is versus, perhaps an augmented process. So very interesting set of challenges there in engaging with customers now on this front.
It certainly is. And, to that point, I think that the opportunities, to increase the accuracy an organization or let's say of a data set, the challenge then becomes, or the opportunity becomes, where do I put my emphasis, right?
Yeah.
Because, you can look at this thing from a boil the ocean aspect of, hey, I've got so many null fields, or, right, I've got a variation or a distribution on a field that looks out of the norm or has a really long tail associated with it, right? Do I go in and focus on everything, which obviously is impossible, or how do I prioritize the areas or the fields that I know are most descriptive in downstream products or downstream models, and the challenge there is continually working with the data scientists and the data engineers to ensure that they understand what it is that they're using, how good is that data, how good are the data down to the field level, so that as they are doing their modeling, they can understand why they're getting the results, or whether they can, confidently depend on a coefficient or not associated with their output.
Do you think that is human in the loop likely to be with us for a long time, especially if you start to think about, agent-based architectures? Curious your personal opinion, where human in the loop fits into a lot of these new technologies, versus kind of a autonomous future?
I think a lot of it boils down to where in the value stream it appears, right? So again, if you're dealing with contractual terms and conditions, then yeah, I can see human in the loop in that area for quite some time, right? Anything that's legal or regulatory, I really do see the opportunities for us to help to continue to train the models and for them to get better. I have a military background, and so I pay attention to what's happening all the time on the AI front in the government space as well. The unveiling this past week of the latest Air Force, I won't even call it a drone. It's essentially another air vehicle that's flying with a manned fighter jet, but it has the capability of potentially of delivering weapons without having a human essentially steering it. And again, the modeling and the training and the aspect that went into the models, all the data that went into building those models and to have that level of capability, it's just astounding. And so again, it's just a matter before the application gets twisted or turned a little bit that it ends up in the commercial space, and we're applying it to our everyday processes. But things are just moving so fast. It's just amazing the capabilities out there. And case in point, when you go ahead and you throw the whole idea of quantum computing into this equation as well, it just becomes mind-boggling. The capabilities that this stuff is going to have going forward is really going to be something. My challenge as a data professional with the whole quantum world is I'm worried about, all the encryption models that we've done to try to protect all of our data for all this, time and effort. I'm worried that those encryption models are all going to go out the window as soon as, quantum capability becomes more available.
Yeah, absolutely.
When we first started doing the podcast, we'd ask a lot of people, like, pull out the crystal ball or, the genie bottle that you would rub to get 3 wishes. And what do you imagine, or what's your ideal state, right? 5 years from now, what do you hope that data allows us to do, or how things have shifted? So, and like, what's your pie in the sky, like, vision for what we can do with data and AI and modeling as it relates to insurance?
Well, so specifically in the insurance space, all right, I'll go back away from my government, Terminator scenario. It's one thing to be told that you've got to have insurance, right? So you go through the exercise of, hey, I'm going to get my auto insurance, or hey, I'm going to get my mortgage insurance, or my house insurance, renter's insurance, whatever it is that essentially someone's telling you need to have that, right? Or you can't, do something. But, you know, getting into the life insurance space, getting into the annuity space, getting into these other products that are very good products that can help people, you know, retire with assets and be able to live, you know, healthy and great lives beyond, you know, building their nest eggs. Those types of products, I think, are really still out of reach for a lot of people because they really don't know what's available. They don't know what the opportunities are. They don't understand the products. And quite frankly, you know, the agents and the brokers, they're focused on the big fish, right? Because again, there's only so much of them to go around. So I think that as we democratize all of this insurance information, I think there's going to be a really good opportunity for folks that just don't even have access to some of the products that we've got in the industry today. It's going to give them access. It's going to give them a reason to move forward with some of these things. And again, it's going to be because there's education and opportunity for them to learn and understand more about what it is that they would be buying.
Well, that's a great way to conclude. Louis, we appreciate especially your return visit to Unstructured Unlocked. I think that will be a wrap for today. As always, a great conversation. Again, Tom Wilde, your co-host.
Along with Michelle Gouveia. Thanks so much for joining us, Louis. We really appreciate it.
It's such a pleasure. It's great talking with you guys again. Thanks so much.